They were young, in love, and lethal. What began as teenage rebellion turned into a blood-soaked road trip that left America in shock. For 2 long months, starting in the bitter winter of 1957, 19-year-old Charles Starkweather and his 14-year-old girlfriend, Carol Ann Fugate, carved a trail of horror across Nebraska and Wyoming. 11 lives lost, 11 families shattered. What drove these two so young to such darkness? He remains one of America's most notorious spree killers, and he was only a teenager. It all began in December of 1957 when 19-year-old Charles Starkweather snapped. Fueled by rage and joined by his 14-year-old girlfriend, Carol Ann Fugate, he carved a trail of death across Nebraska and Wyoming. 11 innocent lives stolen in just 2 months, each murder more brutal than the last.
Hello, viewers. Today, we dive into one of the most disturbing killing sprees in American history. A teenage couple, a 2-month rampage, 11 lives brutally taken. This is the terrifying story of Charles Starkweather and Carol Ann Fugate, a nightmare that swept across Nebraska and Wyoming, leaving behind only fear, blood, and silence. Without further delay, let's begin unraveling this disturbing story.
In tow was his 14-year-old girlfriend and alleged accomplice, Carol Ann Fugate. Before the spree even began, Charles Starkweather turned on her family. He murdered them all. Then, together, the teenage pair set off on a path of blood and chaos, leaving a trail of lifeless bodies across Nebraska and Wyoming. The nightmare finally came to an end on January 29, 1958, when Starkweather, wounded and cornered during a high-speed chase in Douglas, Wyoming, surrendered. But by then, 11 innocent lives were already lost. But how did Charles Starkweather, a seemingly ordinary all-American teen, go from a heartland boy to a cold-blooded killer? What twisted the mind of a young man raised in the quiet streets of Nebraska into one of the most feared spree murderers in American history? What went so horribly wrong? Charles Starkweather, the third child of Guy and Helen Starkweather, was born on November 24, 1938, in Lincoln, Nebraska. Though raised in a solidly middle-class household, his early life was far from stable. His father, a carpenter, often struggled with crippling rheumatoid arthritis, leading to periods of unemployment. During these difficult times, his mother Helen took on work as a waitress to support the family and keep them afloat. Though Charles Starkweather may have held warm memories of his family, school was a battlefield he never escaped unscarred. His slight bow-legged stance and painful stutter made him an easy target, and the relentless bullying cut deep. Day after day, he was mocked, humiliated, and made to feel less than human. But as he grew older and stronger, that pain turned to fury. He unleashed his rage in gym class, where violence felt like the only language anyone understood. By his teenage years, Starkweather was a ticking time bomb. And when he discovered James Dean, the brooding rebel, the misunderstood loner, it was like looking into a mirror. He found solace in that persona, and something darker too. Eventually, Starkweather dropped out of high school, disillusioned and adrift, and found work at a newspaper warehouse, just another nameless face in a sea of working-class routine. But it was there, amid the stacks of ink and paper, that he met Carol Ann Fugate, and everything began to spiral. Starkweather was 18. Carol was just 13. Their meeting in 1956 through Fugate's older sister, who also happened to be Starkweather's ex, marked the beginning of something disturbing. Their so-called relationship raised immediate red flags.
It teetered on the edge of legality and morality. In Nebraska, both then and now, the age of consent was 16. What Starkweather saw as love, many would come to view as manipulation. A predator had found his prey.
This means that any physical contact between them, no matter how consensual it may have seemed, was, under the law, statutory rape. But legality wasn't the only red flag. Despite their age gap, Charles Starkweather and Carol Ann Fugate grew alarmingly close, fast. Starkweather even taught her how to drive using his father's car. But when Carol crashed it, what should have been a minor mishap turned into chaos. A vicious argument erupted between Charles and his family, one that ended with him being kicked out for good. With nowhere else to turn, he took a job as a garbage collector. But while others saw trash, Starkweather saw opportunity. As he made his rounds, he wasn't just picking up refuse, he was scoping out homes, plotting future robberies. And then, in 1957, the simmering rage inside him finally boiled over. Charles Starkweather crossed the line, committing his first cold-blooded murder, and there was no turning back. On November 30th, 1957, a chilling turning point arrived. Charles Starkweather, desperate, volatile, and armed, tried to buy a stuffed animal on credit from a local gas station. When the young attendant refused, Starkweather snapped. He robbed the man at gunpoint, dragged him into the cold, empty woods, and executed him with a single shot to the head. But that was just the beginning. His next act would be even more monstrous, a blood-soaked moment that ignited one of America's most horrific killing sprees. On January 21, 1958, Starkweather showed up at Carol Ann Fugate's home, but this wasn't a friendly visit. Confronted by her mother and stepfather who demanded he stay away, Starkweather's rage boiled over. He pulled the trigger, murdering both in cold blood. Then, in a horrifying act of cruelty, he turned on Carol's 2-year-old half-sister, strangling and stabbing the innocent child to death. It was a scene straight from a nightmare, and it marked the true beginning of a killing spree that would leave the country shaken to its core. Fugate's role in the nightmare remains one of the most haunting mysteries of the case. Did she help him, or was she just another victim? To this day, Carol Ann Fugate has maintained her innocence, insisting that she was Starkweather's hostage, not his accomplice. Trapped, terrified, and too afraid to run. But Starkweather told a very different story. He claimed she was by his side willingly, helping, watching, sometimes even encouraging. The truth may never be fully known. What is certain, though, is this. Whether captive or conspirator, Carol was there, at every turn, every gunshot, every blood-stained mile of that January killing spree that left a trail of death and fear stretching across Nebraska. But Starkweather didn't want help. He wanted blood. He forced the young couple at gunpoint to drive them to an abandoned storm cellar. There, he shot Robert Jensen in the back of the head, execution style. Then, in a scene almost too horrific to believe, he raped Carol King, and when he was done, he shot her too. 2 innocent teens, gone, just for crossing paths with the killer on the run. By now, the fear across Nebraska was reaching a fever pitch. Towns locked their doors. Families slept with rifles by their beds. No one knew where Starkweather and Fugate would strike next, but everyone knew they would. The rampage was no longer just impulsive, it was methodical, ruthless, and cold. Starkweather and Fugate tore through the Ward residence like a storm of death. Lillian Finkel, the maid, never stood a chance. Clara Ward, home from errands, was met with a nightmare, stabbed mercilessly in her own house. And when C. Lauer Ward returned, Starkweather ended his life with a bullet. 3 more lives, erased. Even the family dog wasn't spared. That small act, the killing of a harmless animal, revealed the depth of Starkweather's cruelty. There was no logic left, no humanity. With blood on their hands and stolen belongings in their arms, they fled once more, desperate to vanish. But the net was closing, fast. What happened next felt like the final scene in a violent, blood-soaked movie. Starkweather panicked. He fled the stalled car, leaving Fugate behind. Some say she ran toward the deputy, screaming that Charles was going to kill her. Others say she'd had enough and saw her only chance to escape. Either way, the bloody partnership was over. A high-speed chase followed. Starkweather tore down the highway in a stolen car, bullets flying. But the once bold killer was now just a terrified boy behind the wheel. When a bullet shattered the windshield and grazed his ear, Starkweather surrendered, not with a final burst of rage, but with a whimper. It was over. The killing spree that had held two states in a grip of fear had finally come to an end. The truth behind Charles Starkweather's surrender wasn't courage. It was cowardice masked in blood.
Carol Ann Fugate ran for safety, pointing back at the boy she once followed through a nightmare. Starkweather, he didn't go down in a blaze of glory. He gave up, not out of guilt, not out of remorse, but because a shard of glass and a drop of blood convinced him he was dying. That's the kind of yellow son of a bitch he is, an officer spat, words soaked in contempt, etched into the final moments of a senseless killing spree.
Charles Starkweather was arrested and charged with just one count of first-degree murder for the brutal slaying of Robert Jensen. Believing he could outsmart the system, he willingly agreed to be extradited from Wyoming to Nebraska, thinking the state wouldn't pursue the death penalty. After all, the sitting governor was known to oppose executions. But Starkweather had miscalculated, fatally. That very governor reversed his stance, making an exception just for him. The boy who thought he'd escape justice was now on a fast track to the electric chair.
At trial, Charles Starkweather twisted his tail like a noose. First, he claimed Carol Ann Fugate wasn't even there. Then he accused her of being a full participant in the killings. Desperate to escape justice, his defense team even tried the insanity plea. But the jury wasn't swayed. They saw through the lies. They saw the monster beneath the teenage face. Starkweather was found guilty of murder and sentenced to death. And as he sat on death row with time running out, he made one final bitter statement that Carol Ann Fugate deserved to die too.
The state of Nebraska executed Charles Starkweather in the electric chair on June 25, 1959. His young life extinguished just as violently as the ones he had taken. Ironically, he was buried in Wyuka Cemetery in Lincoln, Nebraska, the same resting place as 5 of his victims. But Carol Ann Fugate's fate took a different turn, one shrouded in controversy, questions, and lingering doubt. Despite her pleas of innocence and claims of being a hostage, the court saw things differently. The judge determined that Carol Ann Fugate had multiple chances to escape but chose not to, a choice that, in their eyes, made her complicit. On November 21, 1958, she was sentenced to life in prison, becoming the youngest person in U.S. history at the time to be tried and convicted of first-degree murder. Fugate was released on parole after serving 18 years and went on to marry, adopting the name Carol Ann Clare. In February 2020, at the age of 76, she sought a pardon from the Nebraska Board of Pardons, a final bid to clear her name. But the board denied her request. Even decades later, the shadow of the Starkweather murders lingers. The case continues to haunt popular culture, with Charles Starkweather's legacy etched into books, music, and films, a chilling reminder of one of America's youngest and deadliest murder sprees. Bruce Springsteen's Nebraska album draws inspiration from these chilling murders, while Billy Joel's We Didn't Start the Fire directly references the Starkweather homicide. The story's dark legacy also influenced films like California, starring Brad Pitt and Juliette Lewis, Oliver Stone's Natural Born Killers, and Terrence Malick's 1973 classic Badlands. More than just tales of crime, the brutal spree of Charles Starkweather and Carol Ann Fugate shattered the illusion of innocence in America's heartland, marking the end of a simpler, quieter era forever. Viewers, this was the chilling story of Charles Starkweather and Carol Ann Fugate.
a haunting reminder of how darkness can erupt from even the most ordinary places. What are your thoughts on this chilling story? Share your opinions in the comments below. We'd love to know how you feel about these shocking events. If this chilling story gripped you, like, share, and subscribe for more true crime cases that peel back the darkest layers of history. And remember, if you or someone you know is struggling with heavy thoughts, reach out to a mental health professional. Your life and well-being are far more important than any story we cover here. Take care, and until next time, another haunting case awaits.